Have you ever noticed that the pacing, tone, and story development of Frankens'Teen changes after Creature arrives to confront Victor in the first chapter? How Henry and his world are relatively normal until after that incident. I have a theory. The incident in which Victor tried to reanimate Creature before the series started put him into a coma. Days later, he was found in his apartment at Ingolstadt and hurried to the hospital and treated with heavy medications. This is why Creature is less menacing than he was in the original book. The medication took effect and stabilized his coma dreams so that, instead of being terrifying, he became a soft and lovable comfort character. The medications allowed Victor to live out the fantasies of mending bridges and healing that he so desperately needed after his mother's tragic death that spurred him to attempt to create life in the first place. After Creature moves in with Henry and Victor, the rest of the series is the result of Victor's subconscious mind fulfilling his desires as well as attempting to escape reality. Should Victor realize he's in a coma, he would wake up and suffer brain damage, so he must take down all of his mental barriers one by one. If he can do that, he can come to grips with who he is and escape his coma. Further evidence comes from the realization that most of the sitcom takes place in an apartment, which is where Victor originally attempted his botched experiment and where he must come to terms with his failure to bring back the dead. Because yes, Victor failed in his experiment. There is not and never was a Creature. But we'll get to that later. The coma explains why he never changes much, physically, and always wears the same green shirt and loafers. It explains the idyllic sitcom shenanigans that always work out no matter how crazy, as he thought up a safe episodic formula that would run smoothly and keep the world going, allowing his adventures to work like they do. It also explains how a teenager can go off on his own into a world full of crazy sleep-deprived university students, and create life. In addition, it explains why such a large apartment only has a few named occupants within it throughout the sitcom. The faceless apartment residents represent Victor's isolation and inability to make friends with strangers. To him, they are unobtainable and thus nameless. Victor's loafers represent his subconscious want to run from his problems. They are always on his feet so he can flee at a moment's notice. When Victor eventually tosses his loafers in the third act, it symbolizes his willingness to stay and face his problems. For the weebs who have never read the Frankens'Teen manga, you'll see what I mean in due time. The DeLaceys represent Victor's potential business aspirations, which is why Felix and Agatha own the DeLacy Cafe. Moving on to the characters closer to him. Victor's friends are either people he knew in real life or are aspects of himself he can enjoy but cannot associate with himself. Henry is one of the first of such aspects we encounter. Henry represents the openness and forgiveness that Victor so desperately craved in the real world from his aloof father. Victor needed someone who would welcome him with open arms, no matter how many microwaves his abhorred creation nuked. Even so, Henry is shown to have his limits, which encourages Victor to resolve his subconscious issues. Henry reminds Victor that he must be actively improving and cannot live in his idyllic dream world forever. One day Henry will put his foot down and force Victor to move out, which propels Victor to be actively developing his friends' characters on a subconscious level. Liz plays a prominent role in the sitcom but is ultimately unattainable. Since Liz relied heavily on Victor for emotional support when they were children, Victor needed her to reach a certain level of independence from him as she learns to love herself throughout the sitcom's run. This is because he felt that people could only have close friendships after they've matured, stemming from his inability to make friends as a child. However, the person Liz was becoming in his fantasy world was not the broken girl Victor knew in real life, and thus Victor must let her go and come to terms with the fact that some friendships cannot withstand the test of time. The strong mom-friend vibes Liz emits are no coincidence, as Liz is also a stand-in for Victor's dead mother and a way for him to still be with her in his fantasy world. To wake from his coma, Victor must accept that Liz and by extension his mother cannot be a part of his life any longer. Victor's inability to accept his mother's death and her departure from his life is why Victor and Liz have a tumultuous dynamic throughout the sitcom, as Victor is torn between holding onto his delusions and moving on with his life. Justine represents everything Victor wants to be. She is confident, can cook, and makes friends easily. Justine teasing Victor throughout the series is his inner doubts showing through and reminding Victor of all the ways he is not Justine. This pushes him to be better. Though Victor failed in his experiment to bring back the dead, his mind could not cope with that reality. As a result, his creature is a prominent member of the sitcom. Creature represents Victor's humanity, and the perfect man Victor can be, if he only accepts himself and resolves his subconscious flaws. As his friends who represent various aspects of himself help Creature become a better man, Victor himself gets closer to what he deems is perfection. Victor cannot give Creature a name because Creature is Victor. Creature is a clean slate for Victor to bounce his friend's trauma off of and slowly be shaped into the idealized man Victor needs to be. This is why Justine and Creature are hinted to be in a relationship. Justine is the most complete of Victor's friends, and being with Creature helps him become a better person the most. Victor could never have Justine help him as himself, due to her self-aware teasing, so Creature acts as a stand-in. Cramp is the qualities of himself that Victor deems negative and tries to hide from. This is why the cast is afraid of Cramp, and Cramp is ugly. Cramp wants to discover what Victor is hiding and hand Creature over to the authorities, who represent the law and responsibility. Cramp will always oppose Victor because Victor is terrified of the thought of his ideal self being forced to face responsibility for his actions, and worries that the world will not accept him as himself. Cramp's methods gradually become more and more ludicrous because Victor is only an extremely dramatic young adult who couldn't even finish med school dreaming these things up. Victor had issues with his father, so he put Alphonse within a successful corporation and demonized him. Alphonse may be an actual employee at some high-standing job, in the real world, but it's doubtful that he had such a big role that he'd neglect his family. Victor likely feels the death of his mother was partly his fault, as he foolishly thought he might have been able to save her, had he caught on to her illness sooner, but also partly blames his father. William and Ernest do not appear much in the sitcom, as Victor is in denial that he left them in the real world and wishes to resolve his abandonment issues through Creature's relationship with him. This puts Victor in control as the father figure in the relationship. To Victor's young mind, nothing is more powerful than a parent. The narrator is Victor's higher mind, recapping and explaining the progress he's made and the tribulations he will face, allowing insight into how to best awaken him. In a sense, the Victor who wants to escape is sabotaging the Victor who wants to stay lost in his mind so that there can be more conflict and, hopefully, an eventual escape. The escape is a consequence of coming to terms with who he is. Victor may well have been trapped forever in this world. However, like every dream, like everything, there is a beginning and an end. What would happen if Victor never recovered? In his hospital room, we see Alphonse, obviously distraught. He's talking to a doctor with a grim look on his face. The man is saying their insurance is up and the boy has had no change in brain activity in years. The shock of taking him off life support has a very small chance of awakening him. Alphonse tearfully agrees. Back in Victor's world, his friends have finally graduated from university and had their arcs concluded. One by one, they disappear. Eventually, everything is black. Creature comes dashing toward him, glowing brighter and brighter in the darkness. Victor does not run this time. Eventually, Creature reaches Victor and the two embrace one last time. In the hospital room, his life signs fading, Victor mutters his final words. "I am proud of you, my finest creation." He will die never having known his dream, except as naught but a dream. When he came back to reality, he knew it all for the lie it was, knew it as his imagination. Knowing that all his efforts, ambitions, and friends were nothing, he will let go. As he utters his final words, he barely opens his eyes and sees the silhouette of Ernest, his real brother, his face hidden by his hands wiping away tears. They make eye contact and one final realization fills him before he loses all strength.